have you ever thought about how a few simple exchanges, like trading a plant or an animal, could end up completely reshaping entire continents? How it could literally change the course of human history? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today, the Columbian Exchange. And it all kind of boils down to this one kind of crazy question. How on earth did a humble potato, of all things, become the fuel for an empire? It sounds nuts, right? Okay, let's get into it. So, what are we actually talking about here? The Columbian Exchange was this massive, two-way street that opened up after 1492. We're talking plants, animals, people, money, and, crucially, diseases, all moving between the old world and the new world for the very first time. And trust me, the effects are still shaping our world right now. To really get this, you have to understand that this is a story with two very, very different sides. First, let's look at what happened in Europe. For them, this kicked off a period of unbelievable growth, a golden age. You know, we always hear about the gold and silver, but one of the biggest game changers right out of the gate was food. The Americas introduced crops that would totally revolutionize what people in Europe ate. We're talking corn, tomatoes, cacao, but the real superstar was the potato. And I'm not kidding when I say it was a game changer. See, unlike wheat, potatoes could grow just about anywhere, in cold, wet, lousy soil. And the sheer number of calories you could get from a single acre, it was absolutely off the charts. This wasn't just a new food, it was a new kind of fuel for humanity. So what happens when you suddenly have all this cheap, reliable food? You get more people, a lot more people. Europe's population exploded, especially in places like Ireland and Germany. And this huge, well-fed workforce, they became the very engine of the Industrial Revolution that was just around the corner. Okay, but yeah, you can't ignore the shiny stuff. After the Spanish conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, a tidal wave of gold and silver flooded into Europe. Just to put it in perspective, by 1600, Spain had grabbed at least 181 tons of gold, and it's not even counting the mountains and mountains of silver. Now, all this cash didn't just sit in a vault. It poured into the European economy. And honestly, it kind of broke it. With so much more money chasing the same amount of goods, prices went through the roof. It was a period of wild inflation we now called the price revolution, and it turned everything upside down. And this economic chaos basically put the final nail in the coffin for feudalism. The old system, which was all about land and loyalty, just couldn't cope with this new world of cash and global trade. It paved the way for a whole new economic model to take over: capitalism. So if you're living in Europe at this time, the exchange looks like an absolute win. You've got new foods fueling population growth and new wealth creating a whole new economy. It basically set the continent on a path to dominate the globe. But for the people of the Americas, the story was the complete opposite. The very same exchange that built up Europe brought on an absolute catastrophe in the New World, something historians call the Great Dying. Just look at this number. It's hard to even wrap your head around. In some Native American populations, the death rate is estimated to be as high as 95%. And the main cause wasn't war. It was something you couldn't even see. The deadliest things to cross the Atlantic were germs. The people of the Americas had been isolated for thousands of years, so they had zero natural immunity to old world diseases. Smallpox, measles, the flu. These were invisible killers that tore through communities faster and more effectively than any army. Let's make this real. The Inca Empire, a massive, sophisticated civilization, had a population of about 9 million people. A single century later, it was down to just 500,000. And it was the same devastating story for the Aztec and Maya peoples. Their combined population collapsed from around 40 million down to just 3 million in about 150 years. Entire cultures, languages, and cities were just wiped out. So how did a few hundred Spaniards topple the mighty Aztec Empire? Well, the grim truth is, disease did most of the work for them. It weakened armies, killed leaders, and shattered morale long before the final battles were ever fought. It was a biological weapon, even if they didn't know it at the time. Now, the exchange wasn't only about death and destruction. It also brought radical changes to the American way of life. European animals like cattle and pigs became new sources of food. And the horse,
Well, the horse completely revolutionized everything for many indigenous nations, especially on the Great Plains, changing how they hunted, traveled, and fought.
So, we've seen the dramatic results, boom on one side, bust on the other. But how? How is this even possible? What were the engines, both technological and financial, that actually powered this whole exchange? Well, first, you needed the right tools for the job, and European explorers had a killer combo. They had the caravel, a small, fast ship that could handle the open ocean. They had the magnetic compass, which they got from China for direction. And they had the astrolabe from the Islamic world to figure out their latitude. Put it all together, and you could finally cross the Atlantic and, crucially, find your way back. But those voyages were insanely expensive. So how do you pay for them? Well, there were basically two models. First, you had the Spanish system, where the king and queen paid for everything, hoping to hoard all the gold for the nation. But later, the English came up with a brilliant idea: the joint stock company. They let private investors buy shares in a voyage. This spread out the risk and unlocked a massive amount of private money for colonization.
And we have to be brutally honest about the third part of this engine, the human part. The technology and the money made the colonies possible, but what made them profitable, especially the sugar plantations in the Caribbean, was the horrific forced labor of millions of enslaved Africans captured and shipped across the ocean in the nightmare known as the Middle Passage.
So when you put all these pieces together, you see that the Columbian Exchange isn't just some old historical event. It is, for better and for worse, the birth of the interconnected, globalized world we live in today. And you might think this is all ancient history, but I promise you, its legacy is sitting right on your dinner plate. Seriously, can you imagine Italian food with no tomatoes? Or Thai food with no chili peppers? How about Swiss chocolate? Or French fries? None of that would exist without this exchange that happened 500 years ago. And that really leaves us with one big, final question to think about. This exchange connected the world. It gave us new foods and new cultures, but it was also built on disease, conquest, and slavery that caused unimaginable suffering. It brought progress and catastrophe all at once. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the true cost of our connected world?